Out of the northern mists, the Cimbri appeared, wagging an oxen children spear. Cursed by the Nord to forever roam, they search for a land to call their home. If one summer they rest in any land, they shall be punished by Nord's hand. The red wolf shall arise, as king he comes and defeats the red soldiers, while the tribe fights as one. The curse will be lifted from the great host, when Lume welcomes the people of the coast.
Hey, we're here at TNT and we have a special guest today. He is a local author here in Medford that has his first book out, and he's working on a 5-book series, working on his second book right now. His name is Jeff Hein.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to come down.
Yeah, now I personally love your art cover of your book, and you tell me like the main character is depicted on that cover. Would you like to talk a little bit about the current book not the current book, the book that's already out? So.
Right. Yeah, so this was my first book. We released it in November of last year, 2021. Been steadily working on the next one, but life takes over because I'm not just an author. So we're working on that. But the current book that's out is this book called Out of the Northern Mists, The Cimbri Appear, or for a short title, The Cimbri Appear. On the cover that you mentioned is kind of a concept of the whole story, how it begins. At the top of the cover, you can see a tidal wave in the background, and that's kind of the impetus that moves these folks from where they're at currently. They're in Iron Age Europe. They're living in what is now Denmark at that time, and a tidal wave comes in and kind of wipes out their civilization and doesn't give them a choice, and they kind of pick up and move. In real history, they don't really know why a nation of about 60,000 people just decided to pick up and move with all their oxen and their carts and all the things that they owned and move across Europe for the next 20 years.
Yeah, and that's one of the most interesting things I find about your book. It's actually based on like historical fact, and you took some liberties to explain some of the reasons why this may have happened.
Right. It is based on an actual story. That time period, around 120 BC, there is not a lot of actual historical reference that survives. And of course, these folks at the time did not have a written language. So we rely on the stories of historians, Greek and Roman historians from the time period, and a lot of them from after that were taking oral histories and writing them down. So some of it may or may not be, actually historically accurate, but it gives, for me, a good framework of reference to build a story around. And of course, the details, the characters, we don't know those details. So that gives me the leeway then to create the story that I want to create around the framework of real history. So it's not fantasy, it's not, it is fiction in the sense that I had to make up a large part of it, but it's built within that framework.
Yeah, and to understand that there's no like magic or anything per se, but there is superstition and things credited to magic in the book.
Things that they would have understood as unexplainable, and sometimes then they attributed it to magic or magical beings sometimes, but it's in the context of people who didn't understand certain things, and so religion takes its place, or mystical beings and powers. The gods are a big part of that they believed in at the time. This takes place about 1,000 years before we know what most people recognize as the Vikings. And it starts in that area in Denmark. And so the religion that I present in the book is referenced in many nonfiction historical books as early pagan Germanic religion. They recognize Odin and Thor and Loki, but they come in as different names, as Wodan, Donar, and Loki, but with a little different accent and so on, and some of the other gods. So I represent it as a developing religion that's kind of starting what most people are familiar with the Viking Age, but as an early part of the religion. So some of the gods are recognizable. Some of them had faded away in the next 1,000 years, and more stories had developed. So, yeah, that's and a lot of the magic or things that you mentioned, those develop from those characters and their religious beliefs and their stories and things like that.
And then one of the other things we were talking about before we started this is basically the reason why they keep moving, and you have like a reason for that, a really cool reason in the book too, right?
Sure. In reality, they left Denmark around 120 BC. They don't really know why. I invented the tsunami that kind of wipes out their civilization there, based on the fact there's a long record of tsunamis and high water levels in the Denmark area. So it's realistic in how it happened. We just don't know that it happened at that time or caused this migration. There's reference to it, but we don't have exact. But that's what I used. And then they didn't have much choice. Everything was their food, their crops, everything was wiped out. The land was kind of shot because of all the seawater and the gravel that pulled into the, area, because that's what tsunamis do.
They became somewhat like a nomad tribe.
Yeah, so they picked up and moved. And in that time, anytime a group of thousands, tens of thousands of people moving through your area,
that seems like a threat to me.
You didn't have the local grocery store to go get stuff, so resources are an issue.
Right? Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff, not to mention the military threat and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they, in my perspective, they started off as kind of a beat-up, depressed group of people because they got kind of wiped out. A lot of people were killed, they're pushed out of their area. But then as they gradually begin to move, they're more than just a mass of migrating people. They become a military threat because basically they get their pride back, they get their strength back, they work out the doubts that they have that they're meant to not survive, kind of thing. So they work through that. And the main character's development is a lot of that, because he starts off at about 15 years old and his father is leading the tribe, and he's unlikely to ever become the leader because when he was young he almost drowned in the ocean, and he came the silt and the salt and the things that got into his lungs, and he's been sick all his life up until he's at the time that they have to move. And then along the journey he gets cured, and it sounds a little fantastic on how he was cured, but in fact, it's a real medical thing that, of course, I had to look up and learn about, that cleared his lungs, got him to where he could function. He begins getting his physical strength back. Because he was kind of a weakling, he developed his mind more when he was earlier. So now he's, a good leader. He's experienced. He learned a lot from his father. He becomes physically capable, becomes a warrior, becomes a leader, becomes a chieftain, and eventually will become king of the tribe, and the allied tribes that go with them, because as time goes on and as they travel all around Europe, they add on more individual people and family groups and even tribes that join them in this great migration.
Oh, that's very cool. And now, in the first book, does it take you to where he becomes king, or is that coming in later books?
That will come in later books. In the first books, he starts off 15 years old, kind of a weakling and not anticipated that he's going to become the leader. And then he develops over this time period, I believe, till about 22, 23 years old. And he's thrust into the leadership position because his father dies. But now he's been healthy and he's kind of earned some reputation. And so he's a young leader of the tribe, but it's really still just his tribe. And then in later books, he gets more reputation. He becomes more fearsome. And his personality changes a lot through the whole thing, which is one of the dynamics that I wrote into the book. And again, we don't know this. This is fictitious on my part. The only thing we know from history is his name that the Romans called him at a later date. So all of this is invented on my part, of course, to make an interesting story, but sometimes to explain some of the things that we do know happen, but we don't know why. And so he develops that in the second book. He has some challenges that he's attacked in the wild. There's a big bear attack, and some of the injuries and the things that occur with him at that time will start changing his behavior a little bit, and he will develop and change quite a bit over the course of the future books.
Yeah, that seems like really good storytelling, actually. I don't see a lot of that anymore, so especially like in like video. Movies are actually notoriously bad for being shallow.
Right. Well, you have more time to explain things in a book than you do in a movie, so that's why if you enjoy a movie, go get the book. Because
that's very true.
I grew up in a time where we had more books than movies and internet and games and stuff like that, and so you lost yourself in the books. The old, I don't know if you probably know the old Conan magazines, the black and white.
No, I've never seen any of those.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you need it.
I was more. I didn't do a lot of book reading. I did a lot of manga. So like every time I saw like an animated series, and then like the manga, same thing. Like they have a lot more to develop on.
Right.
So it's really crazy to see how sometimes they differ, because they differ greatly sometimes. Even like the character that you thought did something, nope, that's not even the character that did it.
Right.
They had to condense it, so they made that character do it.
Well, and the professional writers who write for TV and stuff like that are going to always change things. Just like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Last Kingdom series on Netflix. The book series, obviously goes into a lot more detail. Even though they did a wonderful job with it, it's a lot different on television, but it's still really good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and awesome. Some of my influence, Edgar Rice Burroughs, the old Tarzan, and some others, and then the Conan series, and the Conan comic books, the character overall.
Yeah, it's a really cool character.
And more recently, the Last Kingdom series and Uhtred and that group, and so. If you like those type of stories, the Vikings on Netflix, if you like those kind of stories, I think you'll enjoy this book. It's not the same. It's a different time period, obviously. And this book is written from the perspective of the barbarians.
Oh.
As opposed to the perspective of the Romans.
Yeah.
Which is more common because the Romans usually won everything.
Also, they had like a lot of written history.
Yeah,
it's pretty easy.
And because they wrote, right? These guys didn't have written history.
Yeah.
So even anything you do know about these guys is kind of colored by the person that's writing it sometimes.
Now, when I see the front of your book, I see that like he has like that red, long, flowing hair. Is that unique in that tribe? Is that like something or is that something that actually is just like genetically throughout?
No, it's not unique. A lot of the northern tribes had red hair. Not across the board, but it was common. And blonde, in the sense not of like golden blonde, but anything from like what's left of my beautiful flowing hair. Brownish blonde.
I use this hat to hide my baldness.
So it runs a gamut, but red was not unusual. It did stand out a little bit, and I use it in the story as to stand him apart as a
because he looks
unique,
pretty
individual.
Fearsome. Like on the battle, it's not something that you don't notice.
Right, and I describe him tall, muscular, red hair, steel gray eyes, and that kind of and a confident, fierce expression, And of course, this is after he develops through the story.
And that's like a really cool thing too, because like I do enjoy like he has this conflict in the beginning where he's just not strong and he has to figure out ways to actually be competent, and he uses his mind to do that. That's really good character right there, because then when he does come into that strength, now he has a little bit of wisdom. Sometimes he might be a little shrewd, maybe, I don't even know. So
well, and he grows up in his environment, and then the Romans and the more civilized society is a totally different environment that he's not been exposed to, so he has to deal with how they fight, the weapons they use, the tactics and techniques that they use, their thought process. And one of his friends is actually an old Roman soldier that's kind of retired and just wanders, and he's what you would call a wandering journalist today, maybe. And so he's familiar with Rome and he's
Military
friends
tactics.
with these folks, so that
That gives him a little bit of an edge.
a knowledge of
knowledge
kind
of-
of what's going on. He
Yeah.
doesn't really present it as I'm going to help you beat these guys, but it's just knowledge that he
He
gives.
brings that to you. It's
Yeah,
just,
and helps
people
him
like
with
to
the
talk.
language and things like that. And because he's friends with the tribe,
Yeah.
and so there's a group of fascinating characters there. That's Valus, is the old Roman soldier, and there are historical characters that are written into the story that we know of from the historical Greek and Roman philosophers and historians. And then there are the invented characters that I put in there to fill out the story. The rest of his family and things like that. And then some of the Romans, most of the Romans are actual characters, actual historical figures. But we don't always know what they were like. We don't know their personalities. We don't know what they look like. We just know their name, and it says so-and-so defeated so-and-so at this date in this place.
Yeah.
And that's really a lot of times all we know. So if you want to create a backstory, then you got to invent some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is there. And that's why this book is fiction versus nonfiction.
Well, yeah. And being a nice fictional book based on fiction based on reality is such a good way of writing stories.
I can get lost researching this stuff.
That's the beautiful part, isn't it?
And I hope that my hope is that this encourages people to actually ask questions about this group of people and this time period and this way of life and everything, and search it out. Because like when I read a book, a lot of times I'm like, is that a real character or not? And I'll go to the internet and I'll look it up and I'll read about that person and what they were really like. And sometimes it matches what's in the story, sometimes not. And the same with the story. It's like, oh, this is fascinating, but this just couldn't have happened. And then you find out that really did happen.
Yeah, sometimes that's strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, truth can be very strange.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
And one of the things I've said all along is, I don't need to make up a lot of stuff about these real characters, because the true story is so fascinating. You don't even need to make it up. Just tell the truth.
Yeah, like the Spartans. Like, yeah, that's a huge thing, right? Just taping off that army. That's crazy.
This time period is about, the story begins about 20 years before Julius Caesar is born. And most history of this time period is written around that time, around Julius Caesar and the empire, which is later than this time period. This is before that. And the main character that eventually comes around and defeats these guys, which will be in the last book of the series, is Gaius Marius. He's the Roman general that comes up and eventually figures out how to defeat these folks. And he's actually Julius Caesar's uncle. So the connections between all of the actual Romans in these stories are like a generation before the connections with Marcus Antony and all the famous Romans that you might know and things like that. They're connected all the way through, and there's references to all that in my book. Plus, in the back, I put historical notes. I have a glossary in there for unfamiliar terms because I use the Roman names of rivers and places and things like that, because that's the way it's referred to.
That's awesome. That's
so
really awesome.
hopefully that adds a dynamic that people are interested in history. I didn't do that to make it difficult. I did that to encourage people to kind of learn it and look it up maybe.
Yeah, that's a way better way of actually representing the time versus what we do now. Like, oh, apparently people have to have a 9-to-5 job in my story. And I'm like, no, they don't.
Yeah. Yep. So I put a lot of time and a lot of thought. I mean, the story, I became first aware of the real story of these people in the 1990s when I was stationed in Germany in the U.S. Army. And I just became aware of them, thought it was a fascinating history. And then I read an article by someone who's become a friend of mine now, Ludwig Dyke, writes historical not fiction, but I think he's starting a fiction book, but he writes historical nonfiction articles for magazines and things like that. And he wrote an article about these folks, and that's one of the things that started me thinking, well, maybe this would be something that I could write a story about. And that kind of triggered the thought.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to kind of ask you. Now you mentioned that, is like, how do you decide that you just wanted to be an author? That's actually pretty amazing in itself, right? I think it is.
I wouldn't say that I decided I wanted to be an author. I would say that it gradually grew in me that I wanted to tell this story.
Okay.
Like I say, the first concept of it for me came around in the 1990s when I became aware of the story. It's a bit of a cultural story over in that area, similar to our Wagons West kind of thing here in the States in the pioneer days, that kind of thing. And I learned of it there, and at the time, it was before the internet. It was just getting started, and there wasn't a whole lot of information accessible. You had to go through libraries, and that was difficult. And if you didn't know what to ask for, like if you didn't know that Strabo or Posidonius, the Greek historians and stuff, wrote this about these people, well, then how would you know to ask about it? And there's only a brief sentence in most of these references, so it was difficult to get a hold of information. And then gradually, as time went on, with the internet especially, there was more academic things that became available. There were more people that I learned that had done studies and historical writings and things like that, so I gathered more information. I spent my entire adult life in the military. I was 20 years in the U.S. Army, and when I retired, you're supporting a family, you're working and all that kind of business. Didn't really click, but at one point I decided, maybe I'd like to tell this story. And so I just started writing things down and creating a framework and thoughts, and here it is, 20 years later, and we have the first book out. So.
20 years of work. That's amazing.
Well, and it's not fair to say that was entire work, because pull it out and put it away again because something else is coming on. Pull it out and work on it. I had a box up in the attic that came out every 6 months or whatever, and work on it when I had downtime and stuff. But I had kids at home and working jobs and stuff, so it's tough to do that.
Yeah, so. That's an accomplishment.
But yeah, over 30 years ago that at first I became aware of it, and probably 20 years since I first decided that I would try to write a book, and started organizing it in that way and actually writing some fiction.
That's really neat. And I know, like, nowadays everyone believes that teams are the way to go. You should have like a team of writers. I've seen what teams of writers do. You don't need a team of writers.
Yeah.
I like the one person in charge that knows where their story goes, know how their characters act, and knows the fundamentals of them. I'm not one to like big groups of people making decisions, because they try to do like what's the best. And unfortunately, that doesn't make a good story.
This has always been an issue with me, is I kind of like control, because I like things done my way, right?
Yeah.
Not to say that my way is always right, but I accept the fact that it's not always right, and I'll take the slugs along with that.
And that's great, because sometimes that tells like the best stories.
Well, yeah. And I struggled with whether I really wanted to pursue getting a publisher, getting an agent, and sending it to a publisher. That struggle is very, very, very difficult. I did try for a few months to find somebody who would put my book up in front of publishers and try to sell it to a publisher and go that route. Nobody bit. And I kind of thought that was the case, because again, if you're not currently relevant with stories that are in the news, right? A lot of nonfiction these days is very popular with the changes in society and the struggles with various groups and things like that are very popular in the nonfiction area. It's tough to break into an industry as an unknown person. So I finally just said, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to do self-publish. And today, self-publishing really isn't that difficult or that expensive. It can be. And of course, like most things, if you want more success at things, you're going to have to throw some more money and more time at it. But I found a lot of people that would help me. with advice and such. And there are people on the internet that you can hire for things like formatting the inside of the book or the book cover. And for example, the book cover itself was my concept, with the flood that kicked them out at the top. And then underneath that, they're emerging from the misty forest of the mysterious north, out of the northern mists, the Cimbri Appear. And
How tall is he?
They're following the river. 6-ish, 6 inches maybe.
He looks imposing.
He's pretty large.
He looks imposing.
And they're following the great rivers of Europe and coming out of the mysterious north and everything. And so my concept was this. And then through other people that I met through this process, I got a referral to a guy in Serbia that I hired over the internet to do my book cover. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to afford this, because the cover that this other guy had that caught my attention, I was like, that's got to be thousands and thousands of dollars. And it was very affordable.
Yeah, it is so good. I look at that book and I look at that cover, and it screams read me. It really does.
It does. And
it does.
Whenever I go into
so
Barnes,
amazing.
My book's now in Barnes & Noble in Wausau, and it's at the Yankee Bookstore in Wausau. It's here in town at the pharmacy, and it was at County Market, but we took it out until the next book comes out.
Yeah.
And several other places. And whenever I go into any of those stores, I always pull it off the shelf and turn it like this, so when they walk by, they can see the cover, right? So because the spine of the book doesn't
it doesn't
have the
really,
same impact.
No, it doesn't.
So so
it gets lost.
They know when I was
books.
there because they come by and the book's sitting out.
But all of them are. What's going on here? I don't know.
But
weird.
So it's. It's one of those covers that you're walking by. It's like, whoa, that looks very interesting to me.
It is. It draws attention. It looks like there's something definitely behind the cover. Like you just need to know what's going on.
And then on my social media, I talk about certain scenes in the book. And I relate them to real history, like the type of weapons they used, or the mail armor that they used or didn't use, the various cultures that they run into in the tribes, the way that the tactics were fought with the Romans, the real history versus the fictional story. So, and then I put a little excerpt of what I'm talking about with the real nonfiction kind of.
Yeah, I was going through your Facebook, and one of the things that caught me off guard was your good sense of humor on one of the posts that you did.
Yeah.
And I think it's from Indiana Jones, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's been a long time ago, and it's with the bigger guy. I forget his name, the actor.
Yeah.
He's all like, "Look at this guy! He made a book."
Yeah.
See, nobody cares.
Yeah.
And I just laugh so hard because I try advertisement, and that's what I feel like all the time.
It's tough. It's really tough. It's like learning a whole new career. And at this point in my life, I'm kind of not interested in learning a whole new career.
Yeah.
But when you don't have the publisher behind you, that's up to you.
Yeah, it's up to you.
If you're going to sell stuff, you're going to have a business or whatever you're going to do, you're stuck doing it. It does make it easier today with the internet and things like that. But yeah, it's tough, and that's everybody's struggle. So I've been doing well here locally in the hometown here, and I'm not from Medford. I live here now. I'm actually from Highbridge, Mellon area, which is about an hour and a half north of us here.
Oh, okay. So you're still within Wisconsin.
Yeah. And I've always had relations through here and everything. My wife's from town here, and we moved here about 10 years ago. So
yeah, it's a very pretty town here. I like the way it's built on the hill, and then I hate that my store is built on the back of the hill because the water comes in.
Yeah. Yep.
But for where they put a city, it's really nice with like the river down there and the park and all that.
I've had great support from the whole community. Chamber of Commerce and various groups have helped me with advertising, getting the word out, and doing events and things like that. So it's been very positive for me that way.
Yeah, we joined the chamber, and it's been very beneficial to us too. They have such a good Facebook type of following that when you put something out there, at least 2 people read it. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. I got 500 or so followers on my author's Facebook page.
Oh, that's pretty awesome.
I encourage anybody to go to Jeff Hein author on Facebook. If you do Twitter or Instagram, I'm on there too with the same handles. Although I don't really do a whole lot on there because they're not targeted to readers. I just kind of get everybody.
Yeah.
And so there were probably not a lot of them aren't interested in what I'm doing. That's one of those things that, because I hear independent authors, they call them indie authors all the time. They're like, oh, you got to get on Instagram, TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter.
That's a ton of work. You almost need to hire somebody to run all that.
And the thing is, you can just throw it at a wall and hope out of 100 people, one person looks at it. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in targeting the people who have an interest in history, who have an interest in reading, and things like that. I don't want to convert somebody or try to convert somebody that has no interest in that, because it's kind of
people to read is probably a pretty good thing.
Well, it's not a bad thing, but
I'd say that's
when
okay.
it comes down to how much money and time you're spending, you're kind of spinning your wheels, right?
Yeah, I can understand.
So I'm looking for those people that are ready to have an adventure like this. And, if you're into any of the gamings, the historical, the fantasy, any of that kind of stuff, this is going to be right up your alley. You're going to like this.
Yeah, and that's really a cool thing. And do you have anything more to say about the second book coming out?
I'm hoping to be done. I'm about 3/4 done, I'd say. It still is going to have to go through editing and formatting and so on, but I'm hoping to be done by the end of February, so that on into March, I'd like to bring it out and get it out in March, because we have events that we could go to and stuff, so I'd like to have it out by that time. The second book is going to cover from this book ends with their first major battle against Rome. And then it picks up after that, and they're traveling further. And in the second book, they're going north of the Alps, and they're going into the area of France, which is Gaul at that time. And they have conflicts with other tribes and moving through, but they're gaining allies and friends at the same time. And eventually they come across their nemesis, Rome, again, and have a major battle, which I won't tell you if they win or lose, but you can kind of guess, right? So yeah, it's exciting. It picks up where this left off. The story is continuous. There's not really a whole lot of jumping around as far as years or whatever. And so by the time we get to the 4th or maybe the 5th, depending on how things work out, books, it'll be a 20-year picture of how these people traveled on foot, carrying everything they owned from Denmark all the way down through Germany and Czechoslovakia and all the way down into what is Macedonia.
Okay.
Back up into Austria, and that's where this book ends. And then they travel across the Alps, back in through up and down in France, all over that area. Then they go into Spain. Then they come back into France and back down into Italy. So there's probably a total of 4,000 miles, 5,000 miles they walked over this 20-year period. No roads, no buses.
So they're super healthy people.
Yeah. Or they limp a lot. So it's a fascinating story, a real life story, and I encourage anybody to try it out.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome.
It is available also on Amazon for Kindle Unlimited and Kindle, or Kindle Unlimited, where it's like it's a subscription and you can go in and try it out. You can read the first chapter for free if you want to on my webpage, jeffhine.net, to kind of get an idea what it's about. Very cool. Go out there and get it. Come on down on Wednesday the 21st.
Yes, we are having a nice book signing with you. That's amazing. What are those times?
I'm excited to say that we'll do it on December 21st from 5 to 7 here at the TNT on Main Street in Medford. We'll be signing books, meet and greet with everyone. I'm happy to meet you. Tom has a lot of stuff for sale here in the store too, for Christmas gifts and all that stuff.
Ton of that stuff.
So
always.
Come on down, check it out, buy a book, hopefully, and if not, that's okay too. Check out the store.
Yeah. Talk to the author.
Love to
he's
talk
pretty
to
amazing
people.
to talk to. So.
I'm very passionate about this. I love to talk about it.
We are going to have an authored copy here for sale.
I can leave some here.
Yeah. So
that'll be signed.
So if you miss it, we'd still have that nice authored copy.
If those are generally just signed, if you want like a personalized thing, then we can do that too, and I can get it to you. So
I'll have his number so we can contact him.
Absolutely happy to do it.
That would be absolutely amazing. I think unless you have anything else to say, I think we're going to end it here.
I appreciate it.
I think like I said, I don't read much of his book, but I'm definitely going to buy one from him so I could read his book. So apparently I make lots of noise. And yeah, we'll be purchasing a book from him just because, well, I like local people doing amazing things. And I know a lot of people are like, well, it's not that amazing, but it is. It is. It's absolutely amazing. Like, I can't write a book. I could try to write a book, but oh my gosh, we'd be everywhere. And he'd be like, that guy has no brains in his head. And I'll be like, I know, it's so scatterbrained. It's horrible. So, with that, thank you for watching. And hopefully you get to know a little bit more about Jeff here.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Out of the northern mist, the Cimbri appear, wagging an oxen children spear. Cursed by the Nord to forever roam, they search for a land to call their home. If one summer they rest in any land, they shall be punished by Nord's hand. The Red Wolf shall arise, as King he becomes and defeats the Red Soldiers, while the tribe fights as one. The curse will be lifted from the great host when Lupe welcomes the people